Hi, this is Mr. Himatu. In this video, we will discuss the class operating procedure for this particular class. A lot of times I'm going to refer to the class as Financial Algebra rather than its official name of Advanced Algebra with Financial Applications. It just is a little simpler to proceed that way. But anyway, here is how we're going to operate this class this year. So what are we talking about when we're talking about finances and financial algebra and things like that? Well, this diagram here shows basically what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about finance, we're going to talk about money, interest, debt, funds, equity, banking. We're going to basically talk about anything and everything that involves financial applications. And we're going to discuss the math that is behind all these applications. Now you might think of what the main objective is of this particular class. Well, a very formal explanation might be the one at the top here, which says we are going to unmask the mysteries of mathematics with applications to business, finance, and practical living skills. Or, put it more simply, when am I ever going to use this in real life? Hopefully we're going to answer a lot of that in this class. Now, for the most part, we are going to be operating using the flipped mastery learning model. Now, what in the world does this mean when I say flipped mastery learning? Well, let's look at the definition of each of these words, or what each of these words refers to. Okay, initially we're talking about flipped. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the term flipped classroom. Basically, a flipped classroom is where the teaching takes place via a video as homework, and then the written work occurs in the classroom. So this is pretty much what we're going to have here. Each of the lessons is going to have a video attached to it, and that will basically describe the lesson to be learned. Then in addition, there's going to be a worksheet, problem sheet, however you want to think of it, to be worked on. So the flipped refers to the fact that the video is a video lesson, okay? Now, mastery. Mastery implies that you become a master of the content. Now, this doesn't mean that you take and memorize the content. That's not what we're talking about here. It's that you master it, okay? And basically what you might think of this as retakes. We don't move on until the topic, standard, or concept is mastered, okay? So you don't just move on whether you understand it or not to the next topic. You must master that topic before you can move on. Now, there's two types of assessments that are going to be used. We are going to have a formative assessment, which you might think of as like a quiz. And this will be for each standard or concept or topic that we're talking about, okay? And this will be to determine whether or not you have mastered that topic and whether you are set and ready to move on. Then at the end of each unit or chapter, we're going to have a summative assessment, okay? And this is what you might think of as a chapter test, okay? So each unit or chapter will have a number of different standards or concepts that you must master. Once you've mastered those, then you will have a summative assessment or chapter test on that unit. Now the last word here is learning, okay? Now as I said earlier, this is not a case where we want to memorize facts. It is what we want to learn things. And what this is going to be is it's going to be self-paced, because some of us learn quicker than others. Others require longer periods of time. Now, it's self-paced, but there is going to be guidance in terms of we will have these certain number of assignments. You have until a particular date to get them all done, but you can do them at your own pace, basically. Now, previously we talked about standards or concepts or topics. Now, this is our first unit or our first chapter, and these are some of the standards that are in that first chapter. As you can see, that first chapter has a lot of math in it, okay? But each of these can be broken down. They're given with a certain amount of detail, but let's look at 1.1. Determine the mean, median, mode of a data set. Use sigma notation to determine the mean. Create and interpret a frequency distribution table and determine the mean, median, and mode from that frequency distribution table. So this goes into a fair amount of detail, but we basically got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main topics that we need to master in this first unit on discretionary and essential expenses. Okay, now this slide shows you what we're going to call our self-paced unit workflow. It's a flow diagram basically. Now at the top, notice we start with what we refer to as the pre-work or the video lesson, okay? Now, notice at the bottom here we refer to guided notes, okay? You will have access to a document to follow along when you're watching the video and to take notes on it, okay? Obviously you can take and stop the video, back up, look at it again, things like that. But in addition, you should probably try to take notes on the video as you're going along. Now, once you've completed watching the video, then you move on to practice and learn. This is where you have a problems or applications worksheet. You'll be given answers, but the idea is to do the work first before you check with the answers. Now, those of you that are going to be going through this fairly quickly and easily may want to take and do some enrichment work, okay? Because you really need to want to be challenged in this particular class. So these are going to be topics that you should strive to do for enrichment. They're not mandatory, okay? To complete the course, basically you just have to do the basic standards. But if you want to go a little bit further and delve a little deeper, then you may want to look into these enrichment projects or the Strive to Do projects. Now, once you feel you've completed and understand a particular topic, then we will have the mastery check, okay? This is where we have a formative assessment, or if you will, a quiz, to see whether or not you have mastered that topic. Now, if you mastered it, then we move on and go to the next topic. If I feel you have not mastered it, if you fail to demonstrate mastery, then we're going to have some additional practice, and then you're going to try it again, all right? So we'll go through this loop until you reach a point where I feel you've mastered that topic. Then you can move on and do the loop again for the next topic. Once you have completed all the topics in a unit, then, and you have mastered all of them, then you have your summative exam, okay, or your chapter test. Now, if necessary, you can retake that, okay, if you might need additional practice in order to take and learn that material. I think I am going to limit, however, the retakes to a single retake on a particular test before we move on to the next unit. Now, how are we going to do grading? Basically, I'm going to grade in the 4-point system, 0 to 4, and in terms of proficiency. So if you look at these two columns, what I call the standard GPA and the proficiency, okay? This determines, and you look at the explanations on the right column here, this says whether or not you've mastered or are proficient in a particular topic. Now, think of this as basically being 5 questions on a particular topic. If you get all 5 right the first try, you're at the very top, okay? If you get 4 out of 5 right, you've mastered it. You've displayed mastery or proficiency, and this would correspond to a grade of 3, which on a 100-point scale would correspond to a B or about an 85, all right? All right, now, if you got 3 out of 5 correct, this means that you require simpler content for mastery, or you're showing developing mastery. This would correspond to a 2, which on our 100-point system would correspond to a 75 or a C. Then 2 out of 5 correct would mean early development. That's only a grade of 1 or a 65, which is a D. It's just passing, barely. Then all the way down here to if you had 0 correct of the 5 questions, do you show no evidence of mastery? This would correspond to an F, okay? But notice, on the 100-point scale, this corresponds to a 55. It does not correspond to a 0, okay? Mathematically, it just does not make sense to include a 0 grade if you got none correct, as opposed to this. Because if you use a 0 grade, that means that typically you have 60 points for failure, whereas you only have 40 points for passing. So whenever we get an F, it's going to correspond to a grade of 55. Now, in the process of going through this course, you're going to make mistakes. There's no problem with making mistakes. That is how we learn. I love this particular quote, which says, every time you make a mistake, your brain grows. If you never made any mistakes, you wouldn't learn anything, okay? The same with any particular activity. If you always got a hole-in-one in golf, you're never going to learn anything, okay? So I hate to say you need to make mistakes, but you shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes, because this is how we learn. This is how the geniuses in our society invent things. They fail many, many times, but then eventually they learn and then they're successful. So just remember this. Every time you make a mistake, your brain grows. That's how we learn.